for the sake of our debrief. And um, so I did. I'm going to be honest. I got your notification of a brand new paper last night, and so I've only had maybe an hour with it, because of all my commitments and
Right.
some surprises. So I tried to read that in a hurry,
Hmm.
and then wanting to go forward. So a couple questions I have for you. So when it comes to the reading list, the annotations, those kinds of assignments,
Hmm.
and even with the final draft, do we need to talk about an incomplete? And if we do, you need to get that in at the end of this week. I early in semester I said I didn't want to have to deal with it, but if I'm not going to get good annotations and then I would and a strong revision, then I would hardly recommend we extend your semester at least until the 1st of June to give you the month of May to do some serious writing. So that's something for you to think about. Have you started the annotations? Do you have them in a certain form at this point?
I don't, but I don't see it as I don't see it as a problem. I see it as
Oh,
something I can pull together quickly.
okay. I understand that your previous reading reports have not really met the standard for an annotated bibliography. I mean, we've been through this is sort of the episodic nature of our engagements with each other. Part of it's just long periods in between communications and then sort of a wait, hurry up, and then wait again. So I've encouraged you to, oh, and this is fourth semester of this, so I've encouraged you to work harder at those annotations, but I didn't have time even to go back and review your previous work before this meeting. But my recollection is the reading reports have still not represented what I would call true annotations. So when you say you can do it in a hurry, recognize I'm not thinking about something you can do in a hurry. I'm thinking, is it something you can do that meet the standard of an annotated bibliography? So if you want to think about that, again, I'm willing to give you an extension to get quality work in this time. It just feels like every semester we're rushed at the end. The quality is low, and then we are moving to the next semester, and it's the same sort of pattern of engagement. So
Okay.
this
Okay.
is this is me asking you in the midst of late submissions or lack of submissions at all and a busy life that you keep telling me about that can you actually do the work
Hmm.
next month if you have the time to do that, and I'm willing to give that incomplete, but I am then going to expect a different kind of quality of work submitted as a result of that incomplete than what I've
Okay.
experienced in the past.
Okay.
So um, this I didn't know if you had I wanted to get that up front so you
Sure.
thinking about it. I didn't know if you had questions for me at this point in light of the paper or anything you wanted to just report to me first before I start debriefing the paper. But um, anything from your side that you wanted to kind of do to frame
Yeah,
discussion?
I feel like the Center for Academic Writing is something I should have engaged with a long time ago. I think that just the little bit of time I've spent with it has been very, very fruitful and helpful and insightful. And I'm able to see things about my writing I wasn't able to see before, and make corrections and think a little bit differently. And that's been very valuable. And I think that's also why I think I can do the annotation the way it needs to be done. I feel that way because of that, because I've looked at that and I have a conception of what that's supposed to be.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I'm glad you finally discovered the CAW. I think it's been mentioned a couple times in the past, and I know
Right.
it took first half of the semester to find them.
Hmm.
So again, even spaces that I give for you to do certain things, it it's the episodic nature of those. So
Hmm.
I tried to read this paper just as a general paper. I'm going to
Hmm.
point out some things. I know you said they had sent you a revised version and you upload that. I'm going to share screen for just a minute. Some of this is just formatting. These are the things I immediately encountered when I opened your paper. So I wanted you to see it just so you're aware. And it might be that you're not aware in the past. So bear with me. So um, when I open your paper in Moodle, um, and this is what I see. So I download the paper, but I immediately
Mhm.
see a presentation page. Now, to read it in Moodle, then you have to advance it this way. You can't scroll. So I normally merely look at it, just say, is the first page there, and then download it. Okay. But
Mhm.
note two things right away. So number one, note that uh, the first heading is in double space. Everything leading up to this outline of components is in 1.5. It's not double spaced. It's 1.5 lines. And then afterwards, there's no gap. And then the rest of the paper is in double space.
Okay.
Also notice the color changes.
Oh,
This is in purple
what the?
as opposed to black.
Yeah, I see that.
Why? Because so these are things that software tells me right away that probably this component, starting at the quotation, a collection, down to this point at the bottom where the first footnote is, that has no formatting afterwards. In other words, there's no spacing at all.
Yeah.
Though there's even spacing in between pieces of this. It's not like excess body fat around the waist. In other words, this doesn't lengthen out. You've got excess body fat around the waist. All this tells me right away is that this was a straight copy and paste from the website.
Yeah.
I don't have to go check that. The software already tells me that.
Right.
So that you probably literally opened this up, copied from here to here, and paste it straight in and never realize that there's hypertext HTML in the background that
Hmm.
any Word document drives it absolutely insane.
Oh my.
Okay. Those are the kinds of things that happened first semester at NTS.
Hmm.
So I'm just pointing out how all of a sudden, for all the work, for all of it, sending it to the Center for Academic Writing and getting it back, there's still hidden hypertext of a copy paste right out of a website that I can see without even having to download the paper.
Hmm.
So things like that, I mean, it's a rough draft, but things like that clean up. I mean, if you're trying to say you've really worked hard, you've worked hard on the formatting, you've worked hard on the quality of the writing, you've had it reviewed, and then this is the first thing that appears to me, it really does mitigate against the claims that you're making from that standpoint.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so I'm going to stop share, and that because that's the only formatting thing I'm going to talk about,
Okay.
and that's I haven't had time to pour through the. I'm assuming that they worked at getting your citations correct. I'm still a little bit. I will say that by the second full citation, and this is something I need to probably talk to them at the Academic Writing Center, is I'm getting bibliographic format in the footnotes. It's
Hmm.
still not Turabian.
Hmm.
You're starting with last name, first name. You're not using parenthetical citations. Footnote citation, just, I mean, this is grammar 101, but it is basically academic grammar 101, excuse me, is that every citation is one sentence. That's what notations do. Bibliographic citations are sentences. And so the bottom line is this should have been Stephen Coe, then comma, faith and body glorifying God with physical and spiritual health, no period, then parenthetical, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Zondervan, reflective, and comma, 2024, parenthetical citation, then a comma, then one. And so your entire footnotes are still bibliographic in orientation. If they may not do that for you. I know Debbie, the last thing Debbie does in the DMin is review the footnotes. So it could well be that Jonathan Phelps doesn't do footnotes, but all your footnotes need to be reworked is just the bottom line.
Right.
And I'm not going to do that to Debbie. I'm not going to see a DMin dissertation come through my hands that she has
Mhm.
to spend trying to correct hundreds of footnotes because they're all in bibliographic format. So
Right.
that part's part of what's going on. So that's more than I really wanted to say about that. These are just, if you want to irritate a professor who part of his job is being an editor, you've automatically in less than 2 pages got me on the wrong side of the bed, just in the way in which the formatting is set up and the way the first full footnotes start to look. You have not helped yourself. So I'm just going to name it that way. I didn't try to ignore all that except to check footnotes, really more than anything else, around how seriously were you taking the readings that you were engaging in? When were you moving beyond like the first 2 or 3 pages of a book and actually taking seriously the heart and soul of that text? And could I see that from the way in which you were using the materials rather than bringing the materials to support your argument? You're actually including in your argument the major voice of the authors themselves. And I wrestled with that. There were several places where I get the sense that this paper is still pretty much using the books to make your argument around, well, both dualism from a previous paper and metabolic syndrome from a previous paper, rather than asking what's going on within clergy health that I need to be paying attention to before I can make substantive recommendations about how to make a difference in pastors' lives. Am I just going to make recommendations that sound good, but they're really not going to change anything because the systems aren't going to change? Or have I fully paid attention to clergy, and not just my experience of clergy development, but the whole struggle within the field of clergy development and clergy health, so that I recognize where these problems are really manifested. And so when I do a thoughtful way of trying to overcome dualism and try to address metabolic syndrome, I can do it in a way that shows I'm aware of where the problems are to even try to introduce this. How can I do this in such a way that will make a difference? Now, I'm saying that to you because since we've started this has been a personal interest of yours. And I've kept trying to go, so how's this going to work in a dissertation? Are you going to recommend a strategy for a given district? And this is something you're in dialogue with your district about, in a way in which maybe you could envision a curriculum that can make a difference at the district level. Is this something you would do with a ministerial association? And this is how you're going to envision this working within a certain cohort of pastors in a way? Or is this something you're thinking that could make a difference at a more national level, which is what Chris Adams is doing through his projects? But then are you aware of those kinds of national barriers and impediments in the way you're suggesting things? Now, at the top of the paper, basically, the way I tend to understand this paper is, well, we have a problem with clergy health. There are a lot of different things that seem to indicate them, but it's still all really metabolic syndrome. I mean, there's nothing about any other forms of clergy health being sort of introduced early in the paper. It's still, why is metabolic syndrome the problem? And then it seems like, starting with the second page, it's anchored in a particular theological framework of dualism, which you've done work in already. And so I was willing to do that. But then by the time I got to the nature and routine of a pastor, other than you start with an extended, I mean, this is page 3. You do almost 2/3 of the page is an illustration. You then have a quote from the Mayo Clinic Connect website. And I'm going, okay, he's still trying to set up the problem. But then after that, there is not a cited framework that shows up again until we get down to page 5. And the work is kind of a general argument about pastors' activity and struggle with that. But I'm going, how's this helping me understand this against a body of literature and against what's going on? You then starting with sort of again, you start with a practical dualism as a kind of the underlying piece. Um, and I'm still wrestling with, it seems like your whole goal is changing mindset at that point. And I am really trying to figure out, how are you going to do this? Probably the place that became, as I read this, again, haven't had anything else to reference it against for the semester. So as I've read this, other than a very brief outline, you get down to page 6, and you introduce the very first book that was on your reading list, by the way. I know that's probably alphabetical, but um, Caring for Clergy, Understanding a Disconnected Network of Providers. And I thought at that point, okay, he is actually going to start talking about understanding this against the systems dynamic. You're going to begin to think about how this works in a way that is really trying to recognize the whole of what clergy has to address, and a body of literature around systems and what even pastoral care of clergy in the midst of these multiple systems might look like. But instead, um, by the bottom of page 6, you're going, this paper defined metabolic syndrome in its introduction. It's helpful at this point to have the reminder, the name metabolic syndrome. You're back to work that you've done before. And that seems to then drive the rest of your argument. I mean, you just sort of land in the problems of metabolic syndrome again, until you start to come up with some responses to it at the end. Um, and at the end, the 3 responses, there's no subheadings, but the 3 responses that I see that you suggest is: 1, well, have a more holistic reading of scripture. In other words, overcome dualism, which goes back to last semester. And then the last 2 things was drink water and move. And I'm sitting here going, those are good, helpful points to make for why water is important and why moving is important. But I mean, how's this fitting within the goal of this semester, the comprehensive struggle of clergy in maintaining their own health? I mean, how does that not become merely and this is going to sound harsh, so you just stay with me for a minute. How's that not merely become a pamphlet instead of a dissertation of saying, well, we struggle with weight. This is why, and here are 3 things you could do: read scripture differently, drink water, and move. And how are you triangulating that against the world in which clergy have to live when it comes to trying to maintain their health, which I hope by the end of this semester you would have a kind of deep understanding to bring into conversation with MBS, for lack of a better way of using it, and dualism. But half the paper really gestures back to previous semesters. And then when you do get to the pieces I'm hoping that you would be more reflective, more deeply conversant around, I don't really sense that you've engaged the reading in a deeply substantive way. Now, this is where a lot of times the annotated bibliographies bail you out if I have that for reference up to that point. But this has been just the struggle, I think, again, of some of your papers over the semesters, is that when it comes to the point of here's the way I can demonstrate my wealth of understanding around the comprehension of what I've been reading, you tend to land in pretty, and not simplistic, but simple categories, or you tend to rely on, last semester it was 1 book, The Four Views of Dualism, and you don't really show a kind of settling in and engaging the material in a way that has a kind of deeper synthesis that's involved in what you've been working with for the semester. Hope that makes sense. Even in this writing, it's a better writing. I would almost say this writing in some ways might have been and might yet be a beginning point toward an outline of the dissertation, maybe. But what I haven't seen in any of the semesters is how deep can you get down in the wells of these three subjects, the complicated life of clergy health, the depth of metabolic syndrome. That one I think you got. I mean, or at least you keep coming back to it on a pretty regular basis, or a really more nuanced understanding of dualism in a way that sets a deeper theoretical and theological framework over time. So you just half this paper touches on previous work, which I gave you permission to say do, but then I said, show me how it really impacts in the lives of clergy. And I wanted you to read this semester thinking about really the breadth of those challenges and the way in which you do it, but your responses seem to be not very deep, I guess the best way to say it,
Yeah. Yeah.
from the light of what I hope the reading would push you to do. So, I mean, what
Mhm.
about those systems? I mean, even if you were trying to get six pastors together to do this in a community of mutual accountability, I mean, to use that kind of language, what are the systems that really impinge with that? Not just what is the problem of metabolic syndrome, but what are those systems? And what dogs clergy and how they do health, and what are some of the problems that definitely if you're trying to speak to a national audience, what are some of the problems that not in a district that you can control, some of those that I mean you have lead or even in a city that you can control for, but if you're going to make a broader argument, how are you doing it with enough depth of knowledge that people who are reading this in California, Texas, um, Florida, just those kind of different parts of the country, you go, yeah, you do understand the kind of world I'm in, right alongside the world you live in.
Mhm.
I'm not, I don't see that in this writing. I don't show that depth of research in this writing in that kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the piece I don't have, or at least a piece I don't have, is the voice of clergy. Um, I don't have why. If I feel like what I'm saying should be easily understood, that we have a problem with clergy health. This should be obvious. And I also think I respect the intelligence and the understanding of your average clergy person, that they already know certain things to be true. The question is, why is there a disconnect? Why, if we know this, but we're operating like this, why is there a difference? And that is the hard part for me.
Well, and our dissertation is not designed for that. So we've never said do a survey. We've never, I do not want, and you need to hear, if that's the case, then there ought to be a ton of literature already on that why. There ought to be other people asking good questions around the why. And that, out of all the reading for this semester, that you at least show up here, you ought to be able to find, even if you claim you know the why, you can speak for all clergy across the US, you have a pretty good sense of what that looks like. You ought to be able to triangulate that pretty easily against 15 different books that are really focused on clergy health. Unless you think none of those people ask that why question as well, it ought to come into this framework from the standpoint of finding in the body of literature for just this semester. So I'm not talking about you becoming an expert for an entire dissertation yet, but just in the body of literature for this semester, people who have named that why
Mhm.
beside you, or else you've been reading in the wrong area all semester. But I can't, there's no way for me to know that. I don't have the annotations. I don't have any way of knowing that at this point.
Right.
And most of the time when I'm in here, a lot of times, Stephen Coe's a good example. Faith embodied, glorifying God with our physical and spiritual health. And the first couple of times you cite him is pages 1, and then the next time on page 5 of your paper, number 7 footnote, pages 2 and 3.
Right, 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 right.
And
Well,
and
that
and
look at the
Tyler
date of it.
Huckabee, yeah, Tyler Huckabee, Relevant Magazine. So I mean, there's part Jeff Brumley's work um, is a newspaper. I mean, I'm sitting here going, you're, finally number 8, Bruce Epperly. You finally, I'm getting closer to at least something that's read somewhere in the book. But then Austin and Camo again, when they're cited, it's page 3. So
Mhm,
even as I look for what I would call any graduate student paper for signs of a kind of depth of awareness of the reading, I'm having trouble. You're not either in your, and that's a rough draft. So I'm going to keep saying this. It's rough, but I'm not seeing in here a kind of command of the literature that you yourself gave me the reading list for. I didn't give it to you.
mhm,
I just said go
mhm,
find stuff. So I'm assuming, even as you're putting the list together to begin with, which came late, but that you're
mhm,
actually reading, if nothing more than blurbs about the book, so these books have some possible connection to what you're trying to accomplish. This is not merely a word search around clergy health, but there's been some engagement so that this is a reasonable reading list. Or normally, in a normal semester, halfway through the semester, I would have been able to say to you, if you're not getting there, why not? And who do you need to talk to? But we're
mhm,
we're this is where and I'll keep pushing this problem, the episodic nature, this kind of not I'm not chasing you, but getting stuff in front of me for a serious dialogue as the semester unfolds, but then finding myself at the end of the semester with written work that I'm having to make sense of at times. Each semester is just what has been just very difficult then when I'm trying to evaluate that work toward the end of the semester. I don't get the sense, and it could be because you've got multiple things going. I don't want to get into a lot of the why underneath why it comes out this way, but that maybe you're not able to allow this material to gel, for lack of a better way of saying it, like Jello, but to gel long enough for you to see some of the broader connections. But what I'm getting is responses toward the back of each of these papers are really uh, not good synthetic work. It's normally either relying on one or two resources, or it's like this one, relying on one or two ideas at the end. And I'm going, how does that? I mean, how does that match the fullness of what clergy are trying to deal with in their lives? As opposed to being fairly, and again, not doesn't even have to be simplistic. I don't want to use that word, but it is simple in the way those responses are being done. There's no sense of nuance in how drinking more water and moving become sort of central to what to clergy health, in light of other things that clergy have to deal with. So um, so you're I mean, I always feel like we get to this point in the semester and it's like, man, never really got there. Here's
mhm,
the bad news. You get to the dissertation, as well, you didn't quite get there, but we'll move to the next semester. It's been okay for the classes, but we get to the dissertation. There's no, we're waiting to get there. You're going to
mhm,
have to get there. You're going to have to show not just an awareness of metabolic syndrome, but really a much more, nuanced understanding the question of a theological understanding of dualism to match this practical dualism that you raise in this class, this semester. And I'm going to need a much more demonstrated awareness of the fullness of what clergy face, not just by getting their voices and adding them in, but by finding people who've done that work and backing up what you think are your intuitive understandings of what clergy face. There is one of the biggest mistakes at doctoral level is anecdotalism. It's one that haunts a lot of people. It's the kind of thing that somebody could look at you when you submit your work and go, well, that's your experience. But what qualifies you to be the spokesperson are other clergy's experiences. This is just,
Right,
and the phrase is, it's just anecdotal.
right.
And trust me, I know people who spend their entire lives and they're trying to make sure they never get caught in that, in
Hmm.
trying to help others. We don't have, you're not doing a PhD, so we're not trying to get to that kind of level
Hmm.
of sophistication. But we are asking, are you reading in such a way that you're actually using the readings in a way that is grounded to provide solid recommendations going forward, and you can triangulate that against what you've been reading. This is what a review of literature to be able to walk out of that review of literature and say, I know this material, not just one or two authors, but I know this body of literature around this theme, because that's what you're going to be taking on in your synthetic work.
Right.
So there are a couple things going forward. One would be, if there was anything to add to the paper, it's double spaced. Um,
Fix that. Fix the
uh,
formatting.
well, and it's about, it runs 14 pages. Um, if I were, one of the things that would be I just haven't had time, but would be a kind of thought concept for you would be to go in and figure out pieces of this paper that are either extended illustration or merely recapitulation of previous semesters. And when you take that out, how much of the body of the paper is left? That really is reflective of a thoughtful engagement of the material for this semester. And then I would say, how do you add 2 or 3 paragraphs per section that really do reflect the weight of the readings that you've been doing? And again, the thing that just it is, because I like contemporary research, but the thing that just drives me nuts in your sourcing is that you'll go from a book. You've got 15 here, but you'll go from a book to a blog site to a magazine to a newspaper, and I'm going, seriously? How do I adjudicate these sources and resources this way? So do you need it's a Mayo Clinic, I get, but Relevant Magazine, for instance, what qualifies that article over and against 3 books in this area? How do you triangulate that? Those are the kinds of things that at graduate level we ask. We just do. And how do you begin to kind of deepen those sections of this paper might be something it's the most painful thing because it feels like you're just being asked to add sentences in, but it's really going, can you triangulate this material in a way that's worthwhile? And that would be one thing I would say that you could work on between now and the final draft is don't is asking yourself when you're making certain claims and you feel like the claim is based on just one source, could you not just add it to the footnote, but through 1 or 2 sentences, bring other sources into dialogue with them to show the complexity of that moment? I do really wish toward the end of the paper you could talk more about how this fits into the broader view of the clergy's life. So instead of merely saying, um, read scripture differently so that you overcome dualism, um, basically drink water and move, but going, so how does this work within healthcare systems? Do clergy where do they get this kind of advice? Where should they be getting this kind of advice? Is there something that systemically needs to be going on outside of those kinds of statements that have to, where clergy would find this kind of opportunity to give that kind of health coaching, for instance, as a part of what's going on, so that you're not merely just offering that as simple advice, but you're thinking about how do I get this out in such a way that it isn't just a pamphlet that clergy would add one more thing they would add to their desk that they ought to do. But are you thinking about some level of accountability? Are you envisioning some kind of a system in place that might gesture towards something more holistic at that point? Is just something for you to think through. Okay.
I think about it I think I do come at it anecdotally. That from experience, um, if somebody said, okay, this is a problem, and I already know it's a problem. I just don't have the time to deal with it, just as a pastor. Okay. I'm thinking from that framework, and I'm thinking, okay, so somebody else is telling me I got to get healthy. Oh, great. Fantastic. Whatever. Um, and so when I wrote that last section, especially the part about drinking and moving and all of that, I'm thinking out of the life of somebody who is already overworked, somebody who is already trying to do more out of a full week than maybe they even should be. And now we're saying, okay, add this, add that, add the other thing. And when I said something about, drinking water or moving, what I was trying to do is I was trying to give like a handhold, a place to start for somebody that doesn't feel as though they have time to do all of that. And that's kind of where I was coming from. That I am thinking maybe as a pastor that is, over whatever. Um, I was thinking about that person that they, and just simply saying you've got to get healthy, that's not helping very much. But if I'm able to say something, and it does sound simple, to talk about drinking water, for example. Um, but when we do, there are surprising results, um, and helpful results. And
Yeah,
that's where I was coming from.
I get that. And again, if you were writing a pamphlet, I would get that. I but if you're going to make this, so I really don't know what's going to be at the center of your. I really am struggling if I've read your 4 semesters. What is this going to lead to? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and this again doesn't tell me enough to know. I mean, so what will I mean, it's a doctoral dissertation. It's a DMin. It's not a PhD, but it's still a doctoral dissertation. So I mean, outside of, 3 simple rules, I mean, this would be a kind of interesting one as opposed to Reuben Job's 3 simple rules. But outside of that, what are you going to do with this information in a way that actually is trying to take more seriously something larger? And how would you help them monitor that, for lack of a better way of doing it? And I just it just doesn't, it always feels thin. I'm not going to say
Okay.
anyway. And you can still stay with those 3 simple rules. Read scripture in a healthy way, drink water and move.
I could have come up with a dozen. I chose
Well,
those three.
yeah, well, you could say these are the 3 most important, but you do it based on a stronger sense of that you've made the argument for for the fullness and the challenge and the systems that are going on within clergy's lives. That occupies the middle part of this paper far more than MBS and practical dualism. That you kind of walk through, even the the kind of work that really kind of shows not just that clergy are busy, but what are the system, these are some of the systemic issues that are going on that are also a part of clergy health. And you could even just build an argument enough to say that I've proven enough that this would be sufficient. But as long as you go, I just think out of my experience, this would be the best way to go forward. Remember, experience is not bad if you can triangulate that against a body of literature that validates those experiences. That's what I'm trying to push you toward, as opposed to merely thinking your experience makes it happen. And I just seem it just feels like the middle part of this paper replicates previous semesters more than it really deals with the complexity of clergy health. Um, and
Oh,
it, and it stays inside metabolic syndrome. I mean, it just does. I mean, are there, what that part just kind of, I know that's been the thing that you've wanted to do. I've just been trying to get you to expand that a little bit more over
Get
time.
outside of that.
Yeah, get outside of it enough to say, so that if somebody says, well, we'll solve that with Wegovy, you're going, wait, no, that doesn't work that way. And that doesn't solve all the clergy's problems. I mean, so that you can speak with a sense of the breadth of what's needed. And I don't, Eric, at some point you've got to do a dissertation. So you need to hear this language. To do the dissertation, you've got to either get deeper in a couple of the subjects, or you've got to get broader around situating MBS against the full life of what clergy face. And you're going to have to do that academically. You're going to have to do that in the wealth of the quality of the writing, because that's what a dissertation is. And each semester, you may have that. It's the episodic nature of each semester and the kind of incompleteness of the final papers that we've been racing to and through. At times, it just never shows. This was sort of the fourth semester, and kind of could we see that happen this semester? And I think what's going to be really painful going forward after we get done with these 4 semesters is actually doing the kind of due diligence that those earlier papers could have done for you, so you could think forward and trying to make sure that you've actually demonstrated the wealth of the research that you've done. And that's just going to be part of the work of the dissertation. So it's going to be, some people come to this point in the 4 semesters, and I can say to them, you've got plenty there. You've got a lot of synthetic work left to be done, but you've got a lot of material to draw from, and it's already evident. I would say you've been reading in certain areas, but it's not evident in the final papers, that you could just go back to those papers and draw from those papers to make it happen. You'll have to live with that material again as we move forward. And that's going to be part of the challenge when we get to dissertation phase. So it's going to be a lot more work, just because I'm having problems finding it in the way you do the work each semester. Um, and every semester has been kind of a chase. So it's what I'm about to say, but may feel weird. It's kind of like learning a foreign language, like learning Greek or Hebrew.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a while you can kind of get away with kind of knowing the vocab and kind of knowing
Yeah.
the grammar. There's kind
Yeah.
until and all of a sudden you're in the readings and you realize it's no longer kind of sorta. You've got to have demonstrated a much stronger competence to get to the next level, and I think that's going to be work for you. I'm as your lead supervisor. So
Well, I tell you a couple things. One, I mean, it doesn't really matter. But just just the bowling balls and uh chainsaws that I've been juggling um lately. Some of them have become more difficult and time consuming, where I have had to put my full focus over here when I want it to be here. That's one thing. And that is partly because in one particular area of the church, I could have coasted and could have just kept going the way I was going, but I chose to actually lead in a particular direction, and it's been hard. And that is just putting things in general terms without getting specific.
no,
But
yeah,
it's just trying to be a good pastor in a difficult situation. So there's that. Secondly, I don't want you to chase me anymore, and I don't want to chase you anymore. Okay, so I would like to meet more regularly if that's possible. Now, I read what you said about being gone that first weekend of May. We're going to Ireland and the next weekend and whatever, but I think it's important that we keep communicating. Okay, I think that would be important. And I know that's on me, and I'm just saying it. Okay. Third thing, I need to get broader, like I say already, beyond metabolic syndrome. I started there, because we see it a lot. We see the high blood pressure. We see some of these individual things repeatedly.
Yeah, no,
This isn't just a small segment of clergy. This is a large segment of clergy that are facing this little pocket
yeah,
of
I,
things.
yeah, no, I have no doubt of that. So you need to hear. And I would say for a great, I'd say you're onto something for a great research paper, for
Mhm,
instance. You probably have enough there to have made that argument and done well for a
mhm.
research paper, not a dissertation.
Okay.
But at that, you've got dissertation writing is situating that against at least a broader piece of work and showing a demonstrated way of moving forward at the end that is more comprehensive. And again, part of this has just been the struggle of where are you going to implement this? And if you are going to speak to a national audience, not merely to a local group, then you need, then I'm telling you, you've picked an audience where you need to demonstrate that you know this against a broader backdrop, because the
Mhm,
national audience is going to be asking other questions than even a district support group would be, and developing a
mhm,
curriculum for a retreat and support group, much like the example would be in your cohorts, what Scott Whalen's doing. So
mhm,
Scott's doing that over and against a body of literature he's pretty comfortable with, but he has a very specific kind of way of he's walked himself into an intervention that works. We're still talking large conceptualities with you or very private practices. It's one or the other. And I'm going, okay, do you want to write this in such a way that it has a national audience or not? Then you got to be ready to speak in light of that. If you want to write this so it has a district audience and you're coming up with another intervention, again, me chasing you earlier just to get your outline of your dissertation, these are the things that you've got to figure out at this point and how it frames what you're going to be doing next. And we're
mhm,
still talking about, we keep talking about this issue in a global way. Uh,
mhm.
so I'm not sensing an intervention that's something you would even try and then test out. And
That's the hard part. That's the hard part. I'm saying wake up. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, guys, gals, wake up. We can't keep we can't keep acting as though the way we treat our bodies doesn't matter on a spiritual level. We can't do that, but we are.
well, and then I'm trying to get you past the one sermon appeal to that so that you're doing it with uh,
Right.
enough argumentation underneath it that for the person who goes, yeah,
Hmm.
but, or how about, and
Hmm.
you have had enough of a range of engagement with the literature that you can deal with those qualifications and you can anticipate them even in the way in which you're doing this so that you're that people know you are aware of that kind
Right.
of material and you're settling those concerns and you don't I mean it's the different to me, and this is crass, but it's the difference between kind of a self-help guide and actually writing something that's getting thought makers, not just pastors reading a self-help guide, but trying to get people like district superintendents, other people in leadership to
Hmm.
recognize this is a problem that they themselves also want to contribute to and buy into, so to speak,
Hmm.
make a difference. And that you've really started to think, and this is, you're going to hear this language from me, you thought about this systemically over and against the fullness of what, what clergy have to deal with and why.
Hmm.
So, so that becomes part of where I'm trying to get you to think more broadly, more nuanced in the way. I mean, if you're not going to do a focal intervention of some suggestion, then if you're asking for a comprehensive strategy, then the first half of the dissertation really needs to say, and I know the other kinds of things that people are facing. And you can still talk deeply about the subjects of metabolic syndrome and more with more sophistication and nuance around basically uh, dualism and even from the standpoint of developing whether it's an emergent version of that or a supervenient non-physicalist dualism, overcoming that, you'll have to figure out. But doing more work to show a more mature view in those, so people can respect that, who are the very people that are going to be reading this from those fields, and not as not as a PhD, but just going, yeah, he is informed, well informed in these areas, enough to take you seriously for people to wake up to make that change.
Okay.
So if you want to meet again, you're like I said, I am gone the first weekend in May. This is always the thing. It's like, I mean, we could push a deadline until mid-June. It's just and I will say it as your supervisor, it's the frustration of that. You may have other bowling balls. I get that. Everybody does.
Right.
Everybody does.
I
And
know.
you make those decisions, and as I tell every one of my students, it doesn't mean you're a poor student or a bad student. It just means you made decisions and you're willing to live with the consequences of those decisions. I still have a responsibility when it comes to the quality of work in light of the graduate institution that hires me and I represent. So that's
Yeah,
the truth.
I get it.
Um, More importantly, where I'm worried, and I'm going to say this more as a friend, is that there comes a moment in every doctorate, whether it's somebody who is a PhD student at a top tier European program, or it's somebody working on a DMin at the local level. Doesn't matter. There comes a moment where the priority has to get there. We
Mhm.
just see it. Or there are a lot of people that I call ABD, all but dissertation. And I've had friends, good friends, very sharp friends who say, I've been me, I need to do that, but I've got these things to do. I need to do that, but I've got these things to do.
Mhm.
And 6, 7 years pass, uh,
Mhm.
and then they don't do it. So there will be a point you'll have to figure that out in your own organizing of life to create the space that this takes enough priority to get the work done. Uh,
Mhm.
or else, I mean, I am thinking, I'm not sure whether by next January you'll be in a defense mode or not, able to defend. We may be talking another full year beyond that, but you're going to have to figure out how to build that space to get the dissertation done. Well, I've been normally I'm patient around papers through the 4 semesters. It's a different animal, or we may be talking about a different supervisor, so that there's somebody who has more that can kind of work more in and around your pacing instead of around the framework of the dissertation. So um, it'll be one or the other going forward. For now, what I would say is if you can, I mean, we're still counting as a rough draft. Clean up the formatting, please. But more importantly, um, think through places in this. I'm not where literally when you look, um, um, I mean, where you either have long pieces that talk about well, I'd say between 3 and 4, where you do a lot of talking about pastoral ministry in America, but you offer no documentation to back up what you're saying,
Okay.
or places where um, uh, you basically are, anytime you start bringing back in clergy health, I mean, even if you don't take out the pieces where it's called metabolic syndrome, or you're talking about dualism in a way that really rings to the past. Um, I mean, even on page 10, where you said natural pastoral ministry, this is where you try and say what is needed is practical steps that a minister may incorporate into her life. Reasonable handholds are needed for the minister to be able to climb out of whatever physical struggle they are experiencing. What follows is a sampling of workable practices might be employed. It's not comprehensive. So you say that between 10 and 11. But what's really amazing to me is that basically have you got once you got out of the hypostatic union of Jesus Christ, and the goodness of creation, at the bottom you go, the nature of pastoral ministry is demanding and complicated. When you start that on 10, up to the end of that, you again offer no documentation to support you in what you're saying. I mean, does anybody in here saying we need to get past complex pieces to offer more simple work? You invite no one in to back you up, even when you move into those kinds of spaces. And I'm left with a set of assertions without any kind of triangulation against the documentation. That's a kind of technical way of thinking about it, but it's like, this is me, this is the experience I see, and I'm going, okay, and so this is the experience I see, this is my understanding of that. And all I'm asking you to do is triangulate it. Just bring in out of the 15 books that you've done, people that would go, yay, bo, we agree with you. And here's the people that are backing me up. Or people go, yes, and you could even say in a footnote, simple instructions may be the most important thing, though there are people who actually acknowledge it could be a little more detail when it comes to actually fixing a system that are just as important as giving those simple instructions. But even if that's just a comment in a footnote based on somebody you know who would not necessarily, in your reading, offer the same solution you do, you're demonstrating to me, I've read those people, I've taken them seriously, and I'm still sticking with my guns, but I'm naming them as the alternative voices. That would
Okay.
be
Okay.
that is enough focal work. I mean, we're not talking about writing whole new sections. I wish there was more in those sections. I wish there literally was more that was not your voice, but literally was even some descriptive work, not a lot, but some descriptive work about how two or three people agree about these problems. And so not multiple, I don't need multiple quotes. I need multiple sources coming alongside and out of the gist of what they're saying, how they name it. So it's a sentence with someone's key idea inside that supports what you're saying. I wish there was more of that. So it doesn't feel like it's just merely your observations and deal with them or not. Because honestly, at the next level, we'll say, no, we won't. And but getting better argumentation. This is not better footnotes. This is getting better argumentation, backing up your claims. If there is anywhere in the craft of research book where the authors talk about claims and their backing is the phrase they use. How do you back up the claims that you make? And then the qualifications. Learning to kind of write that out so it's not merely your conviction, but it's a conviction grounded in the wealth of what's there. Um, that's a piece of the puzzle that you could work on between now and the final version, um, and at least make this a somewhat better paper to finish out the semester with. The annotations I really do need as well. I mean, just honest. I'm just not. I really, as I read this and looked at what you offered versus what you had sent me as a reading list. And again, I got nothing in between. I just kept struggling with what you were citing in light of what you had said you were reading in the way they dialogued with each other. And I'm not opposed to more contemporary materials guide being involved. I just didn't get a sense of how a lot of this outside of the maybe two or three books really were informing what was happening. And that's where the annotations would at least tell me which books got kicked to the curb, as well as which books really were formative in a more comprehensive way. And then if you want, I would encourage you to go ahead and submit an incomplete so we can get that form filled out, signed, and submit it to. I don't know. This is the hard thing about the DMIN program that I have to deal with is I don't know if actually this class is under Levi.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to notify Levi because he's the professor of record in the way the system's set up. But we have to fill out a form and then get that to Levi. And let's shoot for the 15th of June as the deadline for the end of the semester and
Okay.
try to get going forward.
Okay.
Eric, it probably feels every time we meet that there's a bit of a schooling in all this. It drives me nuts too. Again, I just want to keep saying over the 2 years, and it could be the bivocationalness and all the other things you're working with, but it just feels like the work in the program, when it comes to these four classes, has been very episodic in the way in which you can deal with this material.
Right.
And that is now catching up. That component is catching up. And I'm saying to you, I'm fearful after
Hmm.
4 semesters when all of a sudden you do have to start bringing all this material together. It isn't just something you're introducing again each
Hmm.
semester, but you're having to think about it substantively and how all the patterns are put together. That's going to be a lot of work down the road. And
Yes.
and and thinking through what that means for you is something I'm going to encourage you to think about. Um,
Okay.
um, and you know, it might be a conversation even with Levi over time to get me out of that conversation. Would be a healthy thing to have. I know you do have Ireland to go, and Ireland's a kind of bonus trip at the end of the with the
Hmm.
pilgrimage class. And usually then people have that one little class in the summer afterwards to deal with.
Hmm.
That's a focusing effort.
Hmm.
So I don't, you and I technically would not pick up again until fall. Um,
Right.
by then you would have a pretty good idea, I'm hoping through that fourth class of
Hmm.
how you want to move forward. And what you're doing is meeting with me to tell me how the organization of the paper is going to be working instead of
Right.
me
Right.
asking.
Right.
And you got to ask yourself, are you going to be ready for that? Because
Hmm. Hmm.
that's going to be important. Okay.
Of course. Of course. And so I think it's important that we can continue to communicate. Okay. I intend to do that. That kind of thing works for me in pastoral ministry and in other areas of my life. If I um, work that communication into my schedule, you know what I'm saying? If I am, okay, this is when I'm going to meet with this person, this is when I'm going to reach out to them, whatever. Perhaps if you know, I send you an email in a week or something, just so that we're on the
Yeah.
same page, know where we're at.
Yeah. And I'm looking at my schedule, and you know, my classic line is the third week of May right now. Everything is always right now with me, but the third week of May is fairly empty. I've got a few meetings the week of May 12th through the 18th. I can't remember. But you are in
I'll be in
Ireland
Dublin.
that week. So this would be the week after. And then the week of May 26th to June 1 um, is fairly open. Um,
Okay.
I don't want to book something now. I want to book it when you know that you're going to be able to have written something better that
Mm-hmm.
send to me and those annotations. So I've got things I've looked at and had time to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way, for you to think about when we schedule is then how can you, what do you need to backdate? So you know you got material to me at least a week ahead of time that I can actually, in midst of my schedule, find time to engage.
Okay. My first move is going to be to send an email to Levi.
Okay.
That'll be my first move, and my second move is going to be to pull the annotation together. Those are the first two things I'm going to do. And then I'm going to turn around and begin to pull this paper apart. I have a couple of assignments to catch up on for Dr. Hardy, which I feel very confident about. I intend to do that this weekend, along with writing a sermon. But I'm thinking it might be Monday. I don't know. We'll see. Before I am full on engaged with pulling this paper back together.
Well,
Uh,
that's fine. I mean, at that point, the more important thing is getting the incomplete in place. I'm not. Then you can figure out from there and reverse engineer it's one way to think about it, or do your writing blocks as you choose. But think about when would you feel comfortable that you could get me, and I don't want a second rough draft, but if we have to, we'll go that route.
hmm
you can give me something that you at least want to have one last shot at. And then know that date that I need at least a week to kind of
Hmm.
look at that material.
Right, right.
And then from that, you backdate everything else that you got to do. But what I
Okay.
don't want, um, I don't want what happened this time. I don't want something appearing the night before. And I know part of that was CAWs influencing that. But I really do want something that if I read it, I feel comfortable in saying, okay, now here's the last few things you need to massage and nuance. And so again, get to a deadline is mid-June at the latest.
Okay.
It's beyond what I wanted, but if you're going to be in Ireland, I can get that. I'm going to tell you that starting the 11th of June, my life gets very complicated because I'm in a camp from the 11th through the 15th. So if we name anything, when I say mid-June, it's closer to the 10th, um, yeah, or else it's going to be harder to get access to me starting the 10th because the next week I've got a conference. The next week's Mount Vernon, PalCon, and then my summer takes off. So I've been really wrestling to be done by June 1 because I knew how crazy it would be. It's better to say that whatever deadline, I would set it for the first week of June and no later because
Okay.
I'm not going to be helpful to you and you're going to be getting me, you want to talk about ticked off. You're going to be definitely getting me ticked off at that point. So
Okay.
um, so let's make that first week of June the drop dead deadline, and then whatever you need to kind of figure out um, what you need. I really do not chase D-Min students.
Hmm.
This is not the level where you've got faculty chasing you already in other classes. I just don't do that. But
Hmm.
I do expect when students don't get things in, this kind of graduate level game of, well, is this the deadline or is this really the deadline? I didn't get that in. He'll probably come looking for me to let me know. I don't play that at doctoral level. I just
Hmm.
not. I'll be patient normally the first year. Second year, it's really on you to hit those
Hmm.
deadlines, not me. And that's definitely when we get to the D-Min. It really is when you're in trouble or not that you need to reach out to me as supervisor. At that point, theoretically, with the D-Min, other than a couple of coaching sessions, working with you, I'm also the final reader. So,
Hmm.
and one of the hard things you're going to have to ask is, can you meet the deadlines for the D-Min, or do we need to start thinking now about a year out? And how do you
Hmm.
do that over time? And I'm honest, I mean, right up until this point, I've guided you through the four classes, and whether you want to stay with me or you want to entertain a different supervisor. It would be a tough switch at this point, but I've had students that I've taken on at this point in their journey. I've actually taken on students who actually went with the supervisor right up to the very end and then switched at the last minute, normally dedicating another full year with me, but that's also a possibility. So um, I'm trying very hard. I am going to be involved with the DMEM program, partially because Delmi's coming back. So I'm going to be active with her over the next
Right.
2 years. But then
Right.
I
You
think
told me about that.
yeah, but then after that, I think I'm going to be done. I'm
Hmm.
not seeing myself being added in at this point in my career to future cohorts. And I'll be thinking more about my retirement at that point, and how to finish the last couple of years with this um, grant that we're working on more than doing anything else. Uh,
Okay.
so just recognize that. So if you think at any point that and I really normally would not have this conversation this way. It's just the busyness of your last 2 years and how that's influenced things. And I'm going, yeah, can you be done by next January? Only if you only if your life changes to some degree or you block time. I mean, at least you
Mhm.
want other classes.
Right.
If you're going to have to go for another full year around that, that's one thing. But if you think it might actually take you longer,
Hmm.
we need to be thinking about a different supervisor. So,
Okay. Well, one
I,
step at a time, one step at a time.
all
First
right,
step, like I say, I'll contact Levi. Second step, annotation
okay.
and moving forward.
All right.
So,
And you send me when you think your writing deadlines will be done, and I can send you, then we can, if lunch and early evening is the best times for you, then we can schedule a time by Zoom at that point. And you
okay.
up on the books at least so you know what you're working toward from that standpoint. Okay.
Okay. All
All right.
right.
As always, I'll put this in YouTube. It's unlisted. No, it's not for anybody else, but it's
Okay.
just a way for you to go back and take a look at this. And I think I heard him say this, but did he really say that? Or more importantly,
Hmm.
sometimes for me, did I
Hmm.
say that? Then
Hmm.
it's a record for both of us moving forward. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank
Blessings to
you.
you.
Thank you.
Take care.